So I've lived in Albania for 8 years. This year, I actually acquired Albanian citizenship, which was a huge, huge joy for me. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about how I ended up living here because it's quite an interesting story. So, in 2017, I was living in Malta. I was working as a journalist and a writer, and I was working part time at the Malta Independent as a columnist. And alongside me was Daphne Caruana Galizia. She was a very famous Maltese journalist who exposed a lot of corruption. And she was murdered in October 2017. A bomb was put underneath her car. When she left her house, it exploded and killed her instantly. She was one of the reasons why I decided to move into journalism, and she was a huge inspiration for me. So it had a massive impact on me and my life. And I decided, and some other reasons as well, to go and stay with a friend in Cyprus. So I did that, and then from Cyprus, I decided to go for a weekend in Albania. I sort of booked my ticket around 4 o'clock the night before, and I would have to leave my house at 4 a.m. the next morning in order to get to the airport. Now, I was asleep in bed, and my alarm went off at around 3:45, something like that, and I thought I pressed snooze, but I'd actually switched it off. And I was awoken about half an hour later by the taxi driver banging on my door. And I was lying there in bed like, oh, shall I bother getting up and going, or shall I just turn over and go back to sleep? And I sort of rolled over and went back to sleep. But then suddenly I was like, no, move. And I put my feet on the ground. I got out of bed. I got dressed. And by this time, we were cutting it very fine to get to the airport. So I got in the taxi and I said to the driver, right, drive, go, 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 you know. The poor guy put his foot down, and we got there just as they were closing the check-in desk. They were literally closing, and I ran and I said, please, 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 let me through, let me through. And she sort of looked at the other woman, and they were like, okay, come on. And they let me check in and go through, and I got on the plane and I got to Tirana. And I remember I had this taxi driver, a young man who spoke some English, and he was just so friendly. You know, I didn't know anything about Albania. I didn't even know what currency I was getting out of the machine. He was like, welcome to Albania. It's such a beautiful country. You should go here, you should go there. If you get stuck for anything, just send me a message, ask me. You can come and meet my family, you know, come for lunch, come for dinner. And I was like, wow, this is super, super friendly, because I've never lived in a country where people are that warm, you know. So this was my first impression. And I was staying at the Rogna Hotel. And on the second day, I woke up with a really bad earache, really, really painful. And I asked reception, I said, could you get a doctor for me? And they got a doctor, and the doctor prescribed me antibiotics. And he said, you shouldn't be flying. I was due to fly the day after, so in 2 days. And he said, you shouldn't fly, you should try and reschedule your flight. And I thought, okay, all right, I'll reschedule. And in the meantime, I'd walked around Tirana a bit, and I thought, wow, this is such a beautiful city. The people are so friendly. It's really vibrant. The architecture is a fascinating mix of Italian and communist and sort of brutalism, and then new buildings. And I just felt really inspired being there. And I felt very comfortable and very safe and very secure as a single woman. Anyway, so with my prescription, I went to the pharmacy, I got my antibiotics, and I decided to go for a coffee. And I found myself in Pazari, in this little coffee shop on the corner next to the roundabout. And I sat down, and I was sat outside, and it was a bit of a rainy day. And the woman said, come and sit inside. She didn't speak much English at all, but she said, come and sit inside. Come on, you know, the weather's not good. And so I went inside and I sat at this table, and there was a table next to me with two older guys on, elderly gentlemen. And they were sort of looking at me. I was sticking out like a sore thumb, I guess, because in 2017, there wasn't that many foreign people in Tirana or Albania. And they sort of communicated with me with no English to find out where I was from and what I was doing. And when I said I'm from the UK, they were like, oh, Princess Diana. Obviously, I'm nothing like Princess Diana at all, ever. But I had blonde hair and was British, so I guess that was their reference point. Anyway, I had some food, and I ended up having my first taste of rakia with them. They bought me a rakia, 2 rakias in the end. And I left the restaurant. I have a photo with them. They were really kind and friendly. The woman, Donna, who worked there, I've been back and met her since. And I sort of went back to my hotel and I went to go and change my aeroplane tickets. I wasn't drunk, but I wasn't sober. I'd had 2 rakis. I felt a bit, I don't know, lightheaded perhaps. And I sat down on my computer, and with the tickets I had, I could change the flights for a minimal fee one time. I think it would cost me about 40 euros. So I went to change the date of the flights for 3 days later than they were scheduled. And I did it. And then I got the email confirmation and I looked at it and I'd booked for 3 weeks later. And I was like, oh, no. What am I going to do? And I looked to see how much it would be to change the flights again. And it was more than the original ticket price. So I thought, okay, right, I can't stay in this hotel. I looked up an Airbnb. I found a cheap place to stay in Student City. And I booked in there. The next day I went downstairs, I had my breakfast, and there was a meeting going on in one of the areas of the Rogna of like expats and foreigners. It's called IFIT, and there was a guy speaking there called Emre, who has the vet hospital in Tirana, and he gave this speech about the work that he does, and I thought he was amazing, and I was talking to the people there, and I made friends with him, and I said, oh, I'm going to come and walk the dogs there, you know, and I did in fact go, and I met this Austrian girl, and she said, come tonight, I'm going to a gala dinner. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went with her and I met lots of people, and I just realized that moving to this country was something I wanted to do. I felt comfortable. I was fascinated by it, by its culture, its history. I visited a few places outside of Tirana, and I was just overwhelmed by the natural beauty and how interesting and diverse the country was. I didn't really have any preconceptions before I came, so it was like a kid at Christmas, you know, opening up a gift and just being like, wow, this is beautiful. And it's weird, but within those 3 weeks, I started to feel like I was at home, which, considering I lived in Malta for 10 years and I always felt like an immigrant, this was a very special feeling to me. Like, I never even felt at home in the UK, where I was born and where I grew up. So by the end of these 3 weeks, my friend Iris had said to me, why don't you move in with me? Because through her work, she was given a big apartment, she had a spare room. So I said, okay. So I took my ticket, I left. I came back 10 days later with all my stuff in suitcases and 2 cats in their sort of travel boxes, you know, and I moved to Albania. A couple of weeks later, months later actually, I started a blog called The Balkanista. And this was because I was discovering so much and learning so much about this country, and there was nothing online at the time really about Albania in English. So I started writing down where I was traveling, who I was meeting. And this blog, I remember the first post I made got like thousands of hits, and it started going viral. And the things I was writing, my observations, the humorous things I noticed along the way. I got calls from TV shows saying, come, we want to interview you. And it was just so surreal. So from there, I built the Balkanista, and I started traveling the entire country and interviewing people and working in journalism. Then I worked in journalism for years. Now I work in TV, Euronews Albania. I have a TV show called Inside Albania, which really takes what I was doing with my blog to the big screen and to the podcast format. And it's just been amazing. So basically, I came to Albania on a whim. I stayed through chance, through fate, through a curious turn of events. And it's just basically been an experience that was meant to be. Life here has not been easy. I have a child. I raised her as a single mum for many years. I've supported myself and her and everything with multiple different jobs. I've worked like 80 hours a week to make ends meet. It's hard navigating a new country, a language you don't know, a culture you're not familiar with, and then also dealing with all the things that life throws at you in the meantime. But in Albania, I've never felt alone because the people are so friendly and welcoming. It's so safe. There's nowhere in this country that I wouldn't go by myself, day or night. You know, it's a great place to raise a child. I've been lucky in my career. I've written 3 books about Albania. And basically every dream I ever had has come true through those chain of events which led to me coming here.